You an alien?
What?
From outer space, an alien.
No.
Well then, son, you've got a condition.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist of the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian.
We are talking about the culmination of all of Marvel Cinematic Universe's Phase 1. We are talking about the Avengers. How excited are you about that?
We made it.
Yeah, we did
We
make it.
got here. I didn't
Did you not
doubt.
think you
No, I didn't doubt us. I didn't know how the journey would be.
And how's the journey been for you so far?
It's been really interesting.
Okay. Going back, you mean really interested because obviously we've seen these movies before, but you mean going back and reviewing these movies from an entirely different perspective? That's been really interesting to you, because you've also had to do this for a number of articles. You've watched all of the Iron Man movies. You've seen anything with Loki in it in order to write articles. You've talked at great length about Black Widow. So now you're basically watching again for all those characters that you haven't had to discuss, right?
Yeah, I definitely have watched these movies with purpose and with a focus on a particular character or a particular arc. I think what's different about this is there's just with a podcast, you have a lot more space. The sandbox for me just seems really open and fun, and there's plenty more we can talk about that don't end up in a edited article that's going to be posted somewhere. So this is a really nice format to say some things about these movies, but also to just be really honest and forthcoming about how I'm experiencing these films, not only as a psychologist, but as a huge fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
So this gives us an opportunity to talk about a couple of characters that we've been introduced to in previous movies, but have never really spent adequate time with. Of course, we're talking about Nick Fury, first and foremost, who we first saw at the end in a tag in the original Iron Man movie, where he comes to Tony and says that he's there to discuss the Avengers initiative. Part of this, I think S.H.I.E.L.D. is really where everything breaks down for me in terms of just looking at all the movies on a bigger scale. I think this idea of S.H.I.E.L.D. having existed for as long as it has, and Nick Fury having been involved with S.H.I.E.L.D. for as long as he has, and yet Coulson refers to S.H.I.E.L.D. in the first Iron Man by its acronym, well, not even by the acronym, but by the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division. And then Pepper is like, you need to come up with a better name for that. And he says, we're working on it. Well, S.H.I.E.L.D's been around a long time at that point. So I feel like these are little Easter eggs that they were dropping in. But the further and further we get in this story and the more in depth we get with these characters, the more some of these Easter eggs that were cute in the beginning just sort of fall apart. Nick Fury, while he, not he specifically falls apart, I feel like S.H.I.E.L.D. as an entity.
What do you mean falls apart? Do you mean it isn't cohesive? The full narrative isn't cohesive when it comes to S.H.I.E.L.D.?
I think their treatment of S.H.I.E.L.D. as a secret organization in Iron Man that no one really knew about or took seriously, because the only representative was Phil Coulson, who was a bit super serious, but a little comical, kind of on a bumbling side, constantly wanting to get meetings with Tony, being tossed away by Pepper, then basically used as a shield by Pepper in order to avoid getting caught by the big bad of the movie. Then to reveal that S.H.I.E.L.D. is a much bigger thing with a lot more super competent people with a lot of big ideas. I mean, at the very end of the movie, Nick Fury shows up and says that there is an initiative, that there is a project that they are working on, referring to the initiative or the Avengers initiative. Meanwhile, at that point, the only real superhero that we have gotten to know is Tony, and of course, Nick is saying, "You're not the only superhero. You need to sit down for a minute." Mm-hmm. Well, at that point, we hadn't even really been introduced to the Incredible Hulk. Presumably, Nick already knew about the Hulk because by the time we see the Incredible Hulk movie, the part that you really had a problem with was the opening title sequence. We've already blown past his origin story.
Right.
So presumably that happened somewhere before the first Iron Man movie, and we're just sort of catching up. So Nick knows about Hulk, presumably. Nick knows about Cap, presumably. But Cap is still frozen in ice during Iron Man. So who is he talking about when he's talking about
I think he's still
the
talking
Avengers
about
initiative?
I think he is talking about these individuals. My sense, and this is where I probably would disagree with you, is just that I am just relying on what's happening off screen and off page.
Sure.
Were this the comic books, this would likely be, a little asterisk somewhere in your Iron Man comic book that would say, go read Captain America and issue such and such.
100%.
Which is, this is, and I'm laughing because at times it can be, to see that, it can be very exciting. Like, oh, there's a story that's happening concurrently that I'm not aware of that puts this together for me, or that kind of fills in the gaps, between the margins, between the sequential art. There's something else going on.
Yeah. And those asterisks would be Barton and would be Romanoff,
sure.
And a big green guy that we've not actually contacted yet, but we've got ideas. And now we've got ideas with you, Tony. But that's sort of it.
And I think that's okay for me. I don't feel like I need all of that to be, I don't need exposition or a ton of material to help me put this together. My sense of this is Nick Fury is indeed putting a team together, and you just better believe him. Like, just rely on the fact that he's been designing this. That is what I sort of rely on. I'm not interested so much in the timeline or the gaps necessarily. I'm getting what I need.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that, and I feel that's the way that most of the audience feels. But I think for me, if you've got a grander picture, if you're going to aim at the Avengers, if you're going to aim at Thanos, if you're going to aim at developing this universe, and then you say, look, you're not the only superhero out there. We're developing a super team, and your super team currently only consists of two people who aren't superheroes. They are, they're super spies. They, I mean, one guy's really good with the bow and arrow, but I wouldn't call him a superhero. And I wouldn't call Black Widow a superhero at this point, at this juncture. So really, it's sort of really ambitious to call it, we're putting together a team of superheroes.
It's sort of like we're casting a movie and these two actors have signed on, but...
Yeah, but they're kind of no names. They're no names.
We're still talking to the lawyers and the team of the other folks.
We need the headliners. We need the A-list talent, and that would be Tony. So really where I'm going with this is we're introduced to Nick Fury as this mysterious figure who's put together this super team, and we finally, after so many movies, get to see the super team at work. The super team, of course, consisting of Iron Man, Tony Stark, Bruce Banner as the Incredible Hulk. Then we've got Natasha Romanoff as Black Widow. Thor jumps in a little late to the game, but he jumps in. I mean, in fairness, there was a communication breakdown between Asgard and Earth. And then you've got, who else? Barton, who is Hawkeye.
And Cap.
And you've got Cap, the latest member of the team.
My favorite.
The only one who is technically contractually bound to participate because he still technically belongs to the government. Okay. So, Drea, going forward or going back in time a little bit to your comics where you're reading the asterisks in the margins and the gutters, what did you know about Nick Fury going into the MCU?
Oh, not very much at all.
Oh, you hadn't really, because you weren't really a Marvel person.
I'd say, and certainly not the Avengers. You know, I was reading X-Men, but I'd say that, let's put it this way. I knew of him, when he appeared on screen. I believe I recognized the name, but I didn't know much beyond the fact that he is imperative to pulling the team together.
Yeah.
And I would be not the person to say whether he's similar in the comics than he is in the film.
So what you're saying is you are not one of those kids eagerly waiting to watch as Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., showed up on television starring none other than David Hasselhoff.
I would not expect or like that. I don't know. Did that happen?
It did happen.
Oh.
There was a Nick Fury made for TV movie that starred David Hasselhoff. But you have to remember, it wasn't until 2001, like just after the turn of the century, that Nick Fury took a major shift in his appearance. In fact, it was Mark Millar and Brian Hitch that designed the new Nick Fury in their book for the Ultimates after Samuel L. Jackson, without even consulting with him. I mean, they didn't even ask his permission. And in fact, that's sort of the genius of Sam Jackson, is because I don't know if you are even aware of this, Drea. Jackson was a big comic book fan. And in fact, like you and I has a pull. He's got a pull list at his local comic shop. And one day he's reading this book that he really likes, and he notices that Nick Fury is suddenly not a white guy with an eye patch and dark hair and white hair along the sides, similar to Reed Richards. He is now Sam Jackson.
Well, I think that when he played Glass, he got it. Like when I saw him play Glass, I was like, he gets it.
Wait, so you're saying watching him play a super frail villain?
Ooh, don't give away Glass.
Well, I'm not talking about Glass. I'm just talking about his character. I'm talking about Mr. Glass from Unbreakable.
Yeah.
So you're saying that someone, Mark Millar and Brian Hitch, watched Unbreakable and said, you know who'd make a really great Nick Fury? Samuel L. Jackson. They admitted that they modeled it after him just because he was the coolest guy to ever exist. And they said Nick Fury needs to be the coolest guy who's ever existed, because this is a character that's been around since 1963.
Yeah.
In fact, you and I discussed, when we talked about Captain America, we discussed the Howling Commandos. And I wanted to be very careful about what I said about them because I didn't know what you did and didn't know about their history. But in the original book, in Nick Fury's original appearance, it was Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos. So everything you saw Cap do in those stories was really a Nick Fury thing.
I have seen covers where it's Nick Fury and the Commandos.
Yeah. So it's Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos, then Nick Fury of S.H.I.E.L.D., and now Nick runs S.H.I.E.L.D., dressed as Samuel L. Jackson. By the way, the brilliance of that is when Samuel L. Jackson saw himself in this comic book, he had his people get in touch with Marvel, and they locked up a deal instantly, because obviously you could get litigious if you're like,
Yeah.
look, you have literally painted this guy to look like me. They got in touch and they said, all right, we're going to lock up a deal right now, several years before these movies started getting made, to make sure that Sam is going to be playing this character should he
That's
ever
amazing.
appear on
That's
a big
a
screen.
really awesome contract
Yeah.
to have in hand. I would love to have something like that. That's awesome.
Suddenly from that point on, from 2001 on, no one was a bigger advocate of the Marvel Cinematic Universe than Samuel L. Jackson.
There's like a private financer.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what did you think of Nick Fury, the leader of this super secret organization? Obviously, again, like I said, we've been following him sort of in the other movies, but this is his opportunity to shine. Let's talk a little bit about Nick Fury.
He's really likable. He has to make some hard decisions.
He does make some hard decisions.
But it makes him likable, I think. He's the one who almost has to put, he has to carry the weight of those hard decisions and put his needs aside for this bigger mission, this bigger why.
Let's talk about some of those hard decisions. Like what? What are you referring to when you say that Nick Fury specifically has to burden himself with the weight of these?
Well, I think
decisions?
first of all, as I understand it, he's creating the team. Like he decides, for the most part, he decides the membership of the Avengers. He has an incredible amount of intel and resources, and the hard work is done to identify who's going to be on the Avengers. I think he's brilliant in that. I mean, we're getting into the psychology of what a team has to be. You can't have 5 or 6 Captain Americas. You can't.
Yeah.
It's almost like a game of D&D, right? Like you can't have 5 paladins.
That's true. That's true. But you did make okay. So let's.
I mean, what I'm trying to, and you could have 5 paladins, but
Yeah.
what I mean by this, and bringing it back to Marvel, is I think my understanding is that Nick Fury, at the initial developmental stages of building this team, knew you've got to have heart, you've got to have muscle. You've got to have someone who's going to be pretty self-sacrificing. Mm-hmm. You've got to have people that will be in the moral gray, because Nick Fury's in the moral gray, meaning the government. And help me understand SHIELD. As I understand it, this is the SAT question. Hydra is to the Nazis as SHIELD is to the USA government. That
I wouldn't call
fair?
them the USA government. I would probably say SHIELD is probably closer to
Like the global.
like a NATO, like
Yeah.
a global. They're run through a secretive council. It seems to be headed by the unmistakable Powers Booth.
And it's not up until the Avengers movie, it's not up until this point that the public is aware of this team.
Well,
right?
right. Yeah, like the public technically isn't aware of the team. I mean, they're aware of Tony as Iron Man, but certainly they're not aware of Romanoff. They're not aware of Barton, because those two are super deep undercover operative types.
Mm-hmm. They're not aware of this as a cohesive team that is brought together. And I mentioned Hydra, but what I mean by the Avengers is that Nick Fury has to assemble a group of people who will work together ultimately, but who are they have to edge some of the expectations of the bigger you said global, I'll say maybe government oversight.
Yeah, like it's like a United Nations.
Yeah, but what I mean by that is they are not soldiers. They're not simply the brute force or the supernatural force or the superhero force of the government.
Yeah.
They are their own independent team that SHIELD is managing and building and dispatching.
That's interesting.
To the world.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that if you were to ask the council, the council runs the Avengers. Like the council could shut down the Avengers. They're not an independent team. The council that runs SHIELD, whose executive director is Nick Fury, if they decided to shut down SHIELD, they would shut down the Avengers. Or they could shut down the Avengers without shutting down SHIELD. Like they are not an autonomous unit for the right.
Yeah, I think so. Independent isn't the best word. A separate. It's a separate. Special forces, right? They're that's sort of how I see them.
Team. They're a unique team for unique problems.
And they operate with different rules and standards than that's what kind of why I brought up Hydra. Like they have their own internal rules and standards, at least from the perspective that Nick Fury oversees and kind of delivers their instruction. And things in the future movies are going to fall apart a little bit, but that's how I see this. So it's hugely important that Nick Fury understands the psychology of how teams work, that he understands when this team will be facing moral distress and confrontation, when they will fall apart. He needs to understand all of those dynamics. And I think that he does well with how he is able to, first and foremost, develop this team, but also to be able to ensure its cohesion.
Okay, so let's talk about the cohesion a little bit. Let's talk about Coulson, because Coulson is another character that we've seen in just about every movie leading up to this point. Again, normally in a position of quasi-comic relief. He is meant to be the suit, the quote-unquote suit that is the burr in, say, Tony's butt. He is the guy who is meant to represent the government agency, the secret government agency, but has proven himself helpful in certain situations. That being said, when given an opportunity to see someone like Thor trying to pick up Mjolnir from the desert, he instead just sends person after person after person in to stop him, and each one of those people ends up in the mud, hurting pretty badly. So Coulson is a person of power, and yet kind of the bumbling fanboy we find out in the Avengers. This is a guy who his whole life has collected the individual trading cards for Captain America, dating back to the inception of Captain America, and desperately wants Cap to sign them. Let's talk about Coulson as a character, because he is one of those decisions that Nick Fury ultimately has to make that really helps bring this team together.
Are you talking about planting the cards?
Yes.
Or
yes, but
saying that the cards were in Coulson's jacket?
Yes, but first I want to talk about Coulson, because even without the cards, that man is the one that brought them together. He seemed to be the guy who believed in this team more than anyone else. Even if Nick Fury is the guy who employed them, Agent Coulson is the guy who looked at each one of these people and said, "You are what the world needs." He was the optimist of SHIELD. Talk a little bit about him.
I think there's a little bit of everybody in Coulson. There's this humanity about him. He's not intimidating. he at times can be very serious, and I guess you're right that he represents the establishment, like this tremendous organization that they would be working for. But I also think there's something quite likable about him, and that he needs to kind of be the messenger, I guess, who you can't really say no to him. So he's somewhat necessary. I have to admit that I don't really see much beyond that.
To me, he's the proxy.
Yeah, you mean like he's really who you want.
He's the audience. He's the guy who is fanboying out over the creation of the Avengers. He is the guy who will be able to point out every little Easter egg in the corner of the room of every set piece in this film. He is the guy who ultimately. Wow. I'm about to call him a Marty Stew.
No,
to
don't
some
do that.
degree.
You don't have to do that.
I mean, everyone loves him, even if they pretend not to. And ultimately, spoiler alert, everyone, his death is what unites them, which would be it would be one of those telltale signs of a Marty Stew, right? Like, he kind of couldn't do any wrong, and then he sacrificed himself, and the rest of the team mourned him so much that they came together when they otherwise couldn't. Let's not think about that too much.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that, but it's been a long time since I've heard that phrase.
Okay, so I would say that the Avengers Phase 1 is the culmination of all the Tony Stark stories. Would you agree with me? Leading up to this point, we've had 2 Tony Stark stories where we've seen him go from borderline narcissist to a guy.
I need you to be, or I need to be careful with words like borderline narcissist.
I'm not talking about borderline.
Yeah,
syndrome.
I think you're talking about narcissism.
Yeah, but he's on the border of that. He is on the bubble of narcissism.
So moderate to extreme narcissism.
Correct.
I wouldn't even say he's borderline. Like he is narcissistic. It's not in question.
I think the part that I think I'm going back to where you said he's narcissistic, but he does not exhibit symptoms of narcissism. What is the syndrome?
Narcissistic personality disorder.
Okay. Yes. So
that's more common.
That's the difference.
Yeah, that's more common. Most people, who have traits of narcissism, even very strong traits of narcissism or predominant narcissism, will not meet for narcissistic personality disorder. And I'd say he fits there with having that personality trait as a very, very strong one.
Okay.
He has multiple traits that almost balance, not entirely, but can balance that out. So he's not as damaging and dangerous with his narcissism.
So he goes from that character to more of sort of a world humanitarian, but still someone who believes that only he is the one that can put things right, and then becomes Iron Man for good. And then in Iron Man 2, we start to see the signs of sort of his body failing, and with his body failing, he starts to put things in order for his eventual demise. He ends up saving himself. And then in Avengers, we see the culmination of that. We see this big arc. We see a guy go from it's all about me to now it's all about the world, right? Like, would you agree with that?
I think I'd agree with that. There's more to it than that. I mean, here's how I would put it. This is a man who's been in crisis, and he has questioned his own values, and he's developed some more complicated traits, like self-sacrifice, like being a leader. He really, in this movie in particular, had to step into a leadership role and make decisions almost in a way that he may not have predicted, but he stepped into that with confidence and competence. I wouldn't say that's narcissism. I'd say it's leading during a very critical time for everybody. So I think there's a lot more to it. I think he has a very comprehensive, very rich arc when you start with the first movie and end up here.
Okay. Where we literally see him essentially die. I mean, we watch the death of our first hero as he goes up into space carrying a big nuclear warhead that then ends up blowing up the mothership, the Chitauri mothership, and then he floats back down to Earth and is only revived by the petrifying scream of the Incredible Hulk himself. It's basically a defibrillator for Tony.
And as we will see, that critical moment stays with
okay,
him.
but we're not allowed to talk about
I
that.
can't talk about it.
You know, that's a tease. It's a tease. We're not allowed to talk about that.
I think, and this is Tony's movie. It's such a great film too, because everybody has their moments of thoughtfulness, of brilliance. Everyone has their moment to shine.
And it sets up the juxtaposition between how Tony handles a situation and how Steve Rogers handles a situation. It's you can really see where the seeds of Civil War would get planted here, because you do have moments of tension. You've got great scenes that are tension-based scenes, but you really have the difference between these two people. A guy who will take charge and a guy who, as you said during our watch along, by the way, if you haven't seen it, you can join Patreon and watch us watch the movie. You actually brought up an interesting point. You said Captain America is more efficient or is better when he's taking orders.
He is a good soldier.
Yeah.
Or did I say he's a good lieutenant?
You didn't say a lieutenant.
No.
You said
he's a good soldier.
You said he's a good soldier. You said that he is best when he is taking orders from someone else. And I brought up the fact that, well, the captain is technically a ceremonial title for him. But
what is his rank?
Well, he never even made it outside of, he technically never even made it outside of boot camp. So who knows what his actual rank is at this point.
And I think what I mean by that, and why I even said, well, maybe he's a good lieutenant, is that he should be, and he is, as part of the Avengers, he should be a good leader, and he should be on the field, in the midst, on the battlefield, just being a part. And he does really well. There's a moment where Tony and Cap are trying to salvage the airship.
Mm-hmm.
And Tony, knowing the engineering of the ship, being, just incredibly brilliant about strategies to revive the engines, begins to tell Cap, he just starts listing off deliverables, instructions.
Yeah.
And Cap is really good at what I said. He's really good at being a good soldier. He's
he
good
knows,
at taking those instructions, those demands, and getting it done.
Yeah. In that particular case, what you mean, I think, is that he's a guy who knows when to take a step back. When he doesn't know this ship. The man's been in ice for 80 years. He doesn't really have any knowledge of modern technology. So he knows when he is not useful in terms of coming up with plans. So he knows when to take a step back. He knows when to let Tony take over because he knows this is his expertise.
And I don't know that Tony would do the same. I feel as though, and this is why maybe Cap is my favorite now, but if you don't know why, listen to the last episode where I make a full transformation in my opinion about him.
Okay.
But he is such a good team player because he has all the qualities of a good leader and knows when to take initiative and be out in front as the captain. But he also, I think you said it really well, he knows when to step back, and he knows when he can be efficient and purposeful and contribute to the goal. Mm-hmm. And that's an excellent team player. You put your ego aside, you put your title aside, and you get in the arena and you do what you have to do to protect others, to protect yourself, to get out of trouble, all the things that these superheroes need to do. And I think that is exactly what we need on this team. And I go back to what I said earlier. You can't have 5 Tonys. I mean, how amazing would it be to have...
Actually, you said you couldn't have 5 Caps.
Well, you can't, but you can't have 5 anybodies.
Right.
Like, you can't have 5 Tonys either, because if you have... You could have a whole... we've seen this go wrong, but you could have a whole army of Iron Men.
Yeah, you definitely don't want an entire army of Tony Starks.
But this is exactly why. You need others to be intuitive and to take that step back and to be soldiering through in the trenches.
I don't want to suggest that as a human being he doesn't have an ego, but I do want to say while he exudes great pride, we don't see him suffer from any kind of blows to his ego. Cap, like there are he doesn't let his ego lead him while Tony does. I mean, it's like you said, Tony wouldn't know when to step back because he doesn't know when he isn't best.
Well, true. And 9 out of 10 times he knows best because he's so brilliant. And we talked about this, I think, in the first episode of the MCU podcast, where we realized he has every reason to be so confident. Mm-hmm. It's really difficult then for him to know, or him to consider a little bit more thoughtfulness and taking pause. But I did say that the scene between Bruce Banner and Tony Stark.
I like where you're going with this. Yeah.
My favorite scene.
Yeah, your favorite scene.
I did say that one of my favorite scenes. I think I said
you said it's you said you. In fact, you say it twice. You say it the same way.
This is my favorite
probably
scene.
My favorite scene in the whole movie. Is literally what you say.
My favorite scene in the movie. Is when Tony Stark and Bruce Banner have bonded. They've come to the conclusion that they're both brilliant scientists. They both have connected over their scientific accomplishments as well as their own acknowledgement of hardship. Like having gone through a lot together, having gone through a lot separately and now coming together with those histories.
I pulled this audio. Do you want to hear it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you see, I don't get a suit of armor. I'm exposed. Like a nerve. It's a nightmare.
I've got a cluster of shrapnel trying every second to crawl its way into my heart. This stops it. This little circle of light, it's part of me now. Not just armor. It's a terrible privilege.
So why is this your favorite scene? Like, what does this scene tell you? It's a great scene, but what does this tell you about these two individuals?
I think it's so heartfelt, and it's what you see in the comics. Not necessarily by one writer, but this idea that the role they have is one of suffering.
Yeah.
That the role that they have, and now this bond that they share, this connection they have, is based in a huge level of accountability. Like, you've now taken on this title, you've now taken on these expectations, and it's a privilege. You are going to be seen as someone who's different than the rest of the community because you're a superhero, because you're in the Avengers, because you've been tapped to be a part of this special forces team, right? Mm-hmm. And yet he says it's terrible. It's terrible because then you also have to make very hard decisions. You have to see and witness a lot of suffering. You have to be a steward of trauma. And you yourself have to experience what I think it is they're bonding over, which is loneliness. Mm-hmm. No one truly gets it. No one will ever really know, beyond the glamour and the glitz of Tony Stark's life, beyond the money and the technology and all of those bells and whistles. He is alone in his suffering. Mm-hmm. No one will understand that experience. No one will understand the burden that he carries.
Right.
And I think that Bruce Banner can say the same thing about his life on a completely different level.
Would you say that any of them couldn't? I mean, would you?
I'd say that those two, it's really interesting because I think that those two are the closest to understanding one another, which is interesting, right? Because Tony is unmarked by any kind of radiation, gamma ray, supernatural powers, faults, things that burden other characters here. In many ways, you'd think they're very different, but I think that they're actually quite similar.
Yeah, here's a little piece of audio that is actually a feud between Cap and Tony. Let's take a listen here.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
I know guys with none of that worth 10 of you. I've seen the footage. The only thing you really fight for is yourself. You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play, to lay down on a wire and let the other guy crawl over you.
I think I would just cut the wire.
Always a way out. You know, you may not be a threat, but you better stop pretending to be a hero.
A hero? Like you? You're a laboratory experiment, Rogers. Everything special about you came out of a bottle.
It's the when we are so fatigued and so burdened by a crisis, which they are. I mean, this is something that I think is important to talk about right now. When you are overwhelmed with a crisis, you are very, very vulnerable to these kinds of criticisms. Like these are the buttons you push, and these are the buttons to be pushed. These are the exposed vulnerabilities of these two men.
Yeah.
And they're both wrong to some degree. I think, I had such a great time talking about Captain America because I was the Tony Stark. I was like, what is so special about him aside from this blonde, blue-eyed, superhuman, super muscular man that needs to stare at his own body for some time, as I suggested, to better get to know himself.
Needs to, but doesn't. We should make that clear. He doesn't do that, but you think he needs to. Yeah.
And I think that I would equally feel, where does that come from? It comes from jealousy. It comes from, us being mad, or at least me being mad, that all he had to do was get into that tube and suddenly he looks like this and he's so strong and he's, the perfect man, so to speak. But it's wrong. I'm wrong. Tony Stark's wrong. All of those attributes that actually make him Captain America are a part of his inherent psychology.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the brilliance of that one moment is you're right. They are both wrong.
Yeah.
But they are also both right. Because as we also discussed during our Captain America episode, you can't just win this war with your heart, with your, if you're super asthmatic and can't run a mile and you're 90 pounds, like you still can't do what you need to do regardless of how much heart you bring with you. And on the other side, without that suit, Tony Stark cannot do what he needs to do. He might still be able to create a way to superpower his building or whatever. Like he still has all of those capabilities, that all comes with who he is as a brilliant inventor. But I wouldn't say Cap is wrong. Without that suit, without that personality, without that identification as Iron Man, would you be as heroic to us and the world as a whole as you are with it? And I don't know. I think Iron Man has become so much a part of Tony's identity since that first movie that he is almost more comfortable in his armored suit than he is in his own skin.
Yeah.
So I do
Very
appreciate
well said.
I appreciate the scene. Neither of them are right and neither of them are wrong.
And I think that always leads back to Tony's wisdom about a terrible privilege.
Yeah.
That none of this is perfect. So no one is in a situation, not even Thor, no one is in a situation where they're infallible. No one is in a situation where they're protected from trauma or harm. They all have to reckon with their choices, with the consequences, and with the losses that are about to happen.
Yeah.
Over the course of the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So it is I'm so glad we have this movie because it's so important to start here. Let's start with things breaking down, the cracks, the ugly, everything. Let's start with that because we need to know where our vulnerabilities are. We need to know where our weaknesses are, and they're all psychological.
Well, this is going to be a lot of fun for you then, because let's talk about the person who rams the spike into the concrete to start those cracks. Let's talk about our villain of this movie, Loki. Now, we're not going to talk too much about Loki because as we teased in our watch along, or I didn't even tease, as we announced in our watch along, we are going to cover the Loki TV series next, because that's where the series would fit within the context of the timeline. So we're not going to go too much into Loki beyond this, but certainly everything that's led him to this moment and throughout this film. Drea, I know you've got a ton to say about Loki.
I need to be careful and only say what I can say.
Yes,
right?
Say what you can say.
He is who he needs to be right now, right?
He's doing the best with what he's been given.
No, I mean, I think that he is very, very, he's easily stoking that rage. He is from other people or in other people, that what he's about to do and actually what he accomplishes in this film is unremarkable just in terms of its long-standing repercussions. So Loki has essentially made a bargain where that would involve him inheriting or ruling the Earth. As long as he uses the Tesseract to open up a wormhole, allow the Chitauri army in, and give Thanos essentially, hand over the Tesseract. And, in exchange, he gets to hold this title. He gets to rule over the world. And at the time, I didn't realize this, but rewatching the movies made me realize that the Earth is one of the 9 realms. So it is a pretty good trophy. This is a pretty good deal.
It is Midgard, yes.
And of course, knowing that he doesn't quite have his grip on Asgard, this is something that will give him the power and the title and the authority and just the reputation that he needs to earn his way back, I think, into the good graces of his Asgardian family.
Not the good. I don't think he's looking for the good graces. I think he's looking for the respect of the other, the respect of those people, of Odin, of Laufey, of like he wants to be seen as a ruler in his own right.
I say good graces because I know that honor and power and glory and royal authority is one thing, but underneath that is this is how we love one another. This is the language of love for Asgardians is war, is power.
Conquering?
Yeah, it is. I mean,
we find that out later.
Yeah. So that's why I say good graces. He just wants belonging. He just wants love. And this is how he does it. It's destructive. It's incredibly chaotic. It's violent. It's maddening. And he loves that. So he is in his element. And we get to see all sides of Loki at this point in terms of his mischief, in terms of his brilliance, in terms of his wit. We do get to see a really great dynamic Loki in this film.
There was a moment that you brought up because you remember the last time we saw him at the end of the first movie, up until the tag, was him basically sacrificing himself, was him falling into...
Right, we never talked about that.
We don't know where he went. We only know that in some parallel dimension, he was in some way influencing Selvig to start resuming experiments on the Tesseract. So you then said in this movie, you brought up a term that you have used in your writings about Loki, which was pseudocide. That was his first pseudocide. Talk a little bit about that.
I really am regretting that we hadn't talked about this when we covered the Thor film.
Well, it's because we didn't see that there wasn't a reason to talk about the pseudocide until we saw that he hadn't actually died.
Well, I guess what's important to know is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood that Odin and Thor were somewhat forgiving, at least at the end of the Thor film, where they were willing to take Loki back into Asgard. Loki was essentially hanging off the Rainbow Bridge.
Yeah.
And we don't know a lot about that other than if you fall into space. And Loki, by my understanding, by my observation, Loki commits pseudocide in that he takes an action to fall off the bridge, or I should say he takes an action to let go of the extended hand and willingly goes into the darkness. And I think many of us interpreted that as his willingness to perish, his willingness to be lost in space, his decision to not be there anymore, not be in Asgard anymore, and potentially not be alive anymore. That's how I interpreted it. And it's really, I'd say it's a very sad moment. He gives up on himself because everyone has given up on him. However, we come to learn that this is one of his many illusions. Now, let me just be clear. And look, I could be wrong. Brian, tell me what you think. But I have a sense that a part of him wasn't 100% sure, but that he was willing to leave his life up to the unknown.
Fate?
Yeah, like he was willing nothing, like anything but be with this family, be in this pain anymore.
Yeah, maybe.
So I saw it as an impulsive thing. I didn't know that he had a strategy behind this. Ultimately, it allowed him to go into a dimension where he would make this pact with the Chitauri and with Thanos.
Yeah.
So do you see it differently? And that's why I say this evolved into a pseudocide where he fully remained totally okay, totally willing to let others believe that he was dead.
Yeah. I don't know. I honestly don't know that I put that much thought into the end of Thor to say that I think I think we are led to believe that the whole thing was trickery, because the very next thing we see in the tag is him in a trickster role. So I don't know that I, as an audience member, was ever meant to believe that Loki was wholly giving himself up. I don't think that that's Loki. I don't think that's Loki's character. I don't think Loki would just say, you know what, I was caught. Oh, I am screwed. I got to get out of here.
I wouldn't say, no, I'm not talking about that kind of move.
Because that's ultimately the move that he would have been making at that, like the Rainbow Bridge. Everything was falling apart. The communication between Midgard and Asgard was the ability to travel between the nine realms was breaking apart. Loki had the opportunity to simply not really sacrifice himself, but just escape it all.
That I think is closer to where I'm coming from, which is not. I think this whole like, well, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to deal with the consequences. I just I like, I don't think it was that. I think you're right about the escapism, and I think there's an element. The reason I brought up pseudocide is I think there is an element of wanting loved ones to feel some level of fault, of guilt, of pain. This is what you did to me. This is the consequence of your harm to me. I'm going to take an action to harm myself now.
And he brings that up in this movie. He even asks Thor, how long did you even mourn when I was gone?
Exactly.
And Thor is like, yes, we cried. We mourned. We grieved your loss. And now you're doing this.
And to be clear, that is one of the aspects of a pseudocide. And to define it better, a pseudocide is the taking an action or behavior where the person essentially convinces others in their life that they've attempted or died by suicide. You might see this in our world in different ways, like a note or the way I've seen it is somebody sent a picture or had someone send a picture of an accident, like a car accident or a tragedy, and imply that they were a part of that. So it could be implied that they were injured or that they were in a fatal accident.
Well, that was my question, was, does it have to be suicide? Because I remember there was a sort of what was considered at the time an epidemic of online examples of this sort of thing, where people would be in forums and chat rooms, and they would become like the most loved person in that room, and then they would say, well, I've got cancer, or they would say, they're dark times or whatever, and then their persona would die off, just so that those people could then watch in the forums and the chat rooms.
Oh, as a different person.
Yeah, as a different person, they would watch the mourning of this person, of themselves. They would get to see it happen. And I remember there was like a huge string of these things for a while. And
I think it's in a similar domain as this. The idea that you would fake an injury, an illness, a fatality, a suicide, in order to observe other people's reactions, in order to feel a sense of you matter. And what I'll say, I just want to make sure to say it's an incredibly hurtful, painful thing to do to people, but it comes from a place of hurt. it's Loki does it on the one hand, it's a mischievous thing. It is he's playing his brother like he's tricking his brother. It's so Loki. Loki is definitely being Loki. And as I've written about, behind that behavior is this incredible, deep need to feel that he belongs, to feel that he is cared about, to feel that he matters. And he is so dysregulated by those feelings of rejection that this is his means to that. This is what he does. I appreciate that in this movie, we see the consequence of that. His brother continues to be angry at him. His brother is like, I can't trust you. You are who you are. You're going to betray me. You're going to be a liar. You're going to act out. You're like, you've got all these conduct problems. Like you are, you know, it's kind of the brother telling the other brother, you're like a reckless, unreliable person. Yeah. And I can't trust you. And that dynamic is so seen, so strong here. And I like that they address that because Loki, you're right. Loki says, basically he says, did you even care? Do you care if I'm alive or dead? Do I even matter to you? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to hold off on the rest of Loki because this particular
I really don't want to.
This particular Loki goes through a pretty significant change between now and I guess the last time we see him. Really, beyond that, you've got a couple of side characters. I mean, you've got Hawkeye, who's under a spell. He's under an enchantment throughout.
For most of the probably not most of the movie, but yeah, half the movie, he's not himself.
Yeah, you've got Black Widow. Black Widow does allude to some things in her past. And by the way, this is the very first time. I don't know if anyone out there has seen the Black Widow movie. You know, we are dropped a little Easter egg where in this film from 2012, they make reference to a certain character in Natasha's past who may or may not still be alive. And it's interesting that they've got this little moment here that is referenced right here in this film that then gets carried over into a much bigger part of the story, the villain's motivation in the Black Widow movie. But we don't learn too much about her, and I feel like we learn a lot more about her as we move forward. So I don't know that we have to spend a terrible amount of time on Black Widow from this particular film. Mark Ruffalo, we do get Mark Ruffalo as the Incredible Hulk. This is the very first time we've seen him take on Bruce Banner, and is a significantly different Bruce Banner than the one of Edward Norton. Do you feel like talking about this character, has Mark Ruffalo brought something significantly different for you?
I think he's just a better. For whatever reason, Ed Norton was just not it for me. And I think I said this when we covered.
You did. You were very anti-Edward Norton.
Mark Ruffalo has a sensibility about him that is the thing about Bruce Banner is that he has to be relatable, even though he's essentially in, the top 1% when it comes to his intelligence. Yeah. It's hard to pull that off. And what Mark Ruffalo brings is a sense of deep compassion as a human being. Yeah. So you've got somebody who turns into this massive beast, an unthinking, dangerous, mad, like an actual mad beast, and his counterpart being a very sensitive, thoughtful, and almost phobic man. Sure. Like there are times I just love the mannerisms of Mark Ruffalo, like the little bit of like even his body kind of turns in a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Like the arms come in, the body turns in.
So about that, yeah. So something that I was about to say, very similar to that, and I think you and I are getting to the same space, is the difference between Edward Norton is he seemed like he was desperately trying to remain in control. Yeah. He was upright when he was breathing. He was doing all the ab flexing and, maneuvers. And he just constantly seemed like a guy who was in control of the beast. And the thing about Mark Ruffalo is he is so worn down. He is so tired. He is so wary at this point that he is no longer in control of the beast so much as he is just barely keeping him at bay. And that brings me to the second time you said it was your absolute favorite scene in the movie. And that's, of course, this infamous line.
Dr. Banner, now might be a really good time for you to get angry.
That's my secret, Captain. I'm always angry.
Why was this scene your other favorite scene in the movie?
Probably my favorite part of this movie. My favorite scene in this movie is that moment. And I guess it is because he's letting us in on the secret. Because he's telling his team, but he's telling us too.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm weaponized. By the way, Hulk is always in my identity, always. So I think that's one part. One part is trust.
Yeah.
I'm always Hulk. Like, I think that's the piece that is breathtaking in that moment. Like, oh, this isn't a duality. Either he's there or he's not, or either you control or you don't. This is him saying, I'm him, he's me. Mm-hmm. No, just trust that he's always going to be a part of me.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful thing to say.
Yeah.
The second part of it is the emotion. I'm always angry.
Yeah.
And that's hard hitting because it means it goes back to, it's a nice callback, I think, to the terrible privilege line or the terrible privilege conversation, which is my burden runs deep, and I can't not be upset and furious about my situation or any situation we're in as heroes.
Yeah.
I am ultimately fueled by rage. There's no reconciling. There's no, recovering. There's no sort of like healing of my rage. It's another kind of truth. Like, no, truth. This is the fundamental truth about me. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, I'm angry. I'm going to hold anger in my body. And I don't know, like, if I could not have been the only one when we saw this in the theater, in whatever moment you're in, to say, yeah, that totally agree. I connect with that. Like, yes. And not hard to find somewhere in my being this rage.
Yeah. And I think again, the stature of the two actors, I think one is the difference between a guy who is ultimately he's using his strength to keep the Hulk at bay, to keep the anger at bay. He's doing everything he can to not be angry. And then this other character is a character who has resigned himself to the fact that I'm always angry. And by the way, this is how I keep the Hulk at bay. I always, and as a result, you get to see the physical manipulation that always being angry does to your body. You do start to close off. You do start to bring your shoulders in. Your body just becomes this this twisted character of constant paranoia, of constant fear, of letting go, of constant, just this barrage of this rage and this fear and this anger. And the brilliance of this moment is, look, there are moments where he will slip out. There's not anything I can do about that. But for the most part, by embracing the fact that I am always angry, all I have to do is give into it to pull the trigger when I need the Hulk. And that's what he does in this moment is look, this whole time you guys have known me, I have been angry. I have been on the verge of letting him out.
Yeah.
And he does let him out at one point on the helicarrier. But it's in this moment, I'm just going to give into it and I'm going to let the Hulk take over. And I appreciate that in this moment, we get to see that Bruce Banner from the Incredible Hulk has finally, for lack of a better term, perfected his ability to control the beast inside. Wow. Okay. So there's that. I don't know. I feel like we've sort of covered most of the Avengers at this point, right? Like the movie itself. I mean, the movie is the movie. It's a superhero flick. There's the world is in jeopardy.
Sure. I think we said this on the watch along that it's quite simple in terms of the plot. I will say that this is the movie that generates understanding about teamwork. Now, a team isn't just a bunch of people working together. To have teamwork, you have to work together with a common vision. You have to have some kind of
vision's not here yet. We don't. Yeah. You can't go that far.
Work together with a common goal.
Yes.
Maybe I should say. There has to be some kind of organizational objective shared among the group, and that fuel is so important. And I think you nailed it when you said that Coulson is the glue that kind of starts to put them together again. They were brought together physically, so they're together in proximity, but that wasn't really enough for them to get motivated. It was that reminder of what this is all for. This is for the Coulsons. This is for the Phils out there.
This is for the Coulsons.
And I do want to mention some aspects of team psychology, especially because there's so much commentary and dialogue right now about Olympic athletes and the decisions that they're making independently, individually, and as teams. Simone Biles is an Olympic athlete and gymnast who's talked about quite a bit. In fact, so much that I wish she would kind of be left alone. But she's an Olympian after all, and is the center of our attention. So I understand why people are talking about her. But I think it's important to address team psychology and understand why individuals may make certain decisions or may actually avoid certain decisions if it may impact the team in certain ways. The Avengers were not the perfect team. This is why this movie's great. They were not the perfect team. They had a lot of flaws. They had conflict. They believed, especially Tony, they believed that they were different than one another, and they were jealous of one another, frankly. And I think that when I said earlier, you've got to have a combination of traits that can work together well. You can't have everyone be Captain America, although that would be interesting. You can't have everyone be Hulk. That would be very disorganized. There would be a lot of pain. And amnesia. You can't have everyone be Tony Stark. There would not be a clear leader or facilitator, right? And there are parts of this film that are just beautiful in the sense of them coming together and really shining, having their moments of heroism and being the best at what they do. Even Hawkeye, who is sometimes forgettable, is an amazing archer and has some incredible moves that just are absolutely necessary and part of the team.
Yeah.
So let me just name a few things about team psychology that hopefully will help us wrap this episode.
Okay.
Identity. So team identity is essentially like, are we all clear on who we are individually and who we are as a team? Does it make sense to us that now, of course, having a name like the Avengers really, really helps with team identity. Give yourself a name. Give yourself
which was given to them by Nick Fury, probably, even during Iron Man, which brings up the question, like, that's like he came in and said, look, we already know you're going to have to be avenging something. Like, it's not happened yet, but we know you're going to need to avenge something at some point. So we're just going to go ahead and call it the Avengers Initiative. All right.
And that, I mean, we're kind of joking about the name itself, but even just having that unified label gives them a high degree of loyalty, clarity, and understanding. Second thing to think about is motivation, which we've talked about. This is, how are we going to spark energy and movement? How are people going to feel fueled and ready and not give up? That is hugely important. Being persistent is hugely important.
Yeah.
The third trait is emotional awareness. Not everybody has this, but as a team, there's a sufficient amount of emotional awareness. It means that we take care of one another, we collaborate, we know that some people have strengths and some people have areas of development, i.e. weaknesses, and that we have to look out for one another because we're doing something that's incredibly emotionally burdensome. Mm-hmm. This is a lot of emotional labor, including in addition to the physical labor. So just having that sense of awareness. I do think that Black Widow is slightly more emotionally aware than maybe Tony Stark.
Yeah.
Right? She's probably looking out. She has a really essential role here in looking out for her team members. Communication. They have the technology to have earpieces and communicate with one another. It's what makes this movie fun. But constant communication lets others know, where in the city are you? Are you on the ground? Are you with the Shatari? Are you in space? What's going on?
I'm bringing the party to you.
Yeah, like that all is necessary.
Yeah.
Stress tolerance. This is what the Avengers do. Stress tolerance means that you can manage increasing pressure over a period of time. This means that over the course of the battle in New York, the workload is going to get increasingly harder. Time constraints exist. Once that warhead was in the mix, mm-hmm. once that nuclear bomb was in the mix, mm-hmm. then you had some really serious time constraints you had to think about. So stress tolerance means you can withstand that pressure and you can continue to move forward. You don't fall apart.
Yeah.
And then two final things: conflict resolution, which they've already practiced, thankfully. They can face differences and problem solve when they need to, rather than get caught up in the conflict. Someone like Loki can definitely pit them against each other, so they need to be careful of that. And then the final thing that actually comes from the field of positive psychology is this idea of positive mood. That generally, if the team has a positive mood overall, that builds a generous foundation of encouragement, of an expectation of success, even of like humor. Like we see a bit of humor throughout because, of course, it's a Marvel movie, but just that little bit of humor, I can do this all day, like that sense of can-do attitude, mm-hmm. mixed with humor is really good for teams.
Yeah.
You need to have that morale just be incredibly positive. So I'm so excited and thrilled that they got there, that they have essentially the traits, the essentials of a team that can succeed as far as their psychology goes.
Okay, so now that we've wrapped that up, Do you have anything else, any other points about this movie that you'd like to make?
Well, I do want to say that I lied to people in the last episode.
Come on, how is that ever? You lied to them in every episode. What do you mean by that?
So I told everyone to go out and check out the Long Halloween Blu-ray or DVD because there was... let me just put it this way. I did film an interview with Warner Brothers, and the plan was that the feature would be the feature would be on the disc or in on your streaming channel. Now it's going to be somewhere else, and I just want to apologize for saying that it would be alongside the disc. It's actually going to be featured somewhere else.
We don't know where, we don't know when,
we can't say. So I just want to apologize for the misdirection. I still would love people to go out and buy the discs and check out The Long Halloween. We certainly are going to talk about it on the show at some point.
I mean, it's currently up as a Patreon poll. Do you want us to cover The Long Halloween? And right now there is a resounding yes. So if folks want to hear that, they can come vote. But either way, if we end up covering this, you're going to want to watch the movie.
And I'm so sorry about the miscommunication. I have typically waited until the discs come out, but we've been so consistent when I work with Warner Brothers that it usually ends up, actually this is the first time I think that it's not ending up in the place where we believed it would end up. So
I think we forgive you. We forgive you for publicizing a disc, an appearance that, I don't think you have anything to worry about. You will get to see that featurette or documentary or whatever it is at some point, at some time, just not on these discs. So, Drea, you want to tell the folks where they can find you online?
Sure. Not a lie. You can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, or in social media at Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can find me on Twitter at bward028 or on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions or on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. Come follow us on Facebook and on all kinds of things. Come to Patreon and watch our watch along. Come participate in our polls. We've got a couple of them going on right now. And I want to thank all those patrons that have made this show possible, including a couple of new ones this month. Garion, Nick Gilbert, my father, Carl Ward, Weffy, Eric O'Sullivan, Isaiah Atchin, Christopher Bauer, Ian Stanton, Zachary Hunter, Michael Pruitt, Dr. Girlfriend, Maria Diego, Jay Griffin Hughes, Dr. Jerome Anderson, and our good friend Todd Stashwick. Thank you all for your support. Until next time, I am Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
You and I remember Budapest very differently.